Now, as the name of the video implies, this is the fourth part of a story, so if you haven't seen the first few parts yet, I'd highly recommend starting at part 1, and if you like it, working your way back here. Links to all previous parts will be in the description below. And just a quick note before I get started here, I had a very unexpectedly busy week, so this episode will not only be a bit shorter than I'd originally planned, but I had to do most of it last minute, so my fiance will not be doing the female voices this week. Anyway, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We start on the same lush blue and green world we've been to before, where the same boy and girl, who now appear to be a few years older and are perhaps in their late teens, are atop the same hill overlooking the ocean where they first met, and though the boy sits cross-legged in deep meditation, the girl lays on her back, hands locked behind her head, and stares up into an ever-darkening star-dotted sky, a sky where a large dark gray moon is emerging from one horizon, while a second, vibrant green moon dips below the opposite horizon. We then hear the girl ask, "Do you think anyone lives on either of the moons?" To that, the boy frowns as if he's trying to concentrate, but still feels compelled to answer, and he says, "How many times does Master have to tell you they're not moons, they're planets just like this one, locked in orbit around each other?" The girl shrugs as if the details don't really matter to her, and then she says, "Do you think anyone lives on them? Anyone we could maybe meet someday?" The boy again frowns, but this time it seems to be born of sadness, and he says, "Are you tired of your life here with us?" The girl sits up and shakes her head and says, "Well, no, but you can't tell me you don't ever get bored here, that you never get sick of it just being us three." With a bit of a shy shrug, the boy replies, "Well, no, actually not really. Things have been much better since you showed up." The girl smiles and says, "I didn't mean to imply I wasn't happy here. It's just sometimes I miss the world I came from. I miss all the people I used to know, and the excitement of that life." The boy then hesitantly asks, "And do you want to go back there, to your home world?" The girl shakes her head and says, "No, I don't, because I wouldn't want to leave you." The boy opens his eyes, and for a few long seconds, they just look at each other, both with a hint of a grin upon their face. The boy then looks past her, at the gray world rising from the horizon, and says, "Nothing lives on that planet. It's completely lifeless." He then glances back over his shoulder, where the green planet has dipped completely below the horizon, and says, "But that one's full of life." "How can you be so sure?" the girl asks. Once more, the boy closes his eyes and simply replies, "Because I can feel it, just like you'll be able to feel it when you learn to quiet your mind, like I have. You'll feel how everything is connected, from the biggest creatures in the ocean to the smallest bugs underneath your feet. There is a thread that ties it all together." The girl rolls her eyes and says, "You're starting to sound like Master." The boy gives a small, proud smile and says, "Thank you." But the girl again rolls her eyes and jumps to her feet. But as soon as she does, she stumbles a bit and puts a hand to her head as if fighting back pain. The boy opens his eyes and, looking concerned, says, "Not feeling so well again, I take it." The girl frowns. "No, I'm just tired. It's once again been a long day of nothing." The girl then takes a couple steps towards the small hut that's down at the base of the hill, but begins to stumble. But before she can fall, the boy, with uncanny speed, hops to his feet and moves to her side to catch her. The girl, now being held upright by the boy, looks at him, then back at where he was just sitting, then back at him and asks, "How did you move so fast?" The boy shrugs nonchalantly and says, "I saw that you were going to fall and just let myself react." The girl looks at him confused and says, "You saw that I was going to fall?" The boy nods and says, "The energy of life that's all around us. I guess you can say it can be used to see things, to do things even. Well, more things than just floating rocks like Master likes to use it for." The girl seems momentarily intrigued, but then, with a look, assures the boy she's okay now, and moves out of his hold and starts to head down the hill again. Mostly as a joke, she says over her shoulder, "Don't suppose you can use this power to make me feel better?" But instead of the boy laughing or finding humor in her words, his face suddenly becomes very serious, and we can tell he's starting to wonder if that very thing might be a possibility. We then switch scenes and find ourselves back in the apartment of Han and Leia, where Ahsoka Tano is handing a lightsaber to Luke Skywalker, a saber that once belonged to him and his father before him. And with an impossible to read expression upon his face, Luke hesitantly reaches out and takes hold of the saber, and as he's looking it over, he says, "Where did you find this?" Ahsoka says back, "Oddly enough, I was hoping you might remember, because I get this odd feeling that we found it together once." Luke shuts his eyes tight as if trying to jog his memory, and then says, It feels like almost like something out of a dream. But I do remember you somehow. I do remember you, Ahsoka. And I also remember that you were once a Padawan to my father. Ahsoka nods and says, I was, and I know what happened to him in the end. After Ahsoka says that, Luke takes a moment to glance nervously out of the corner of his eye at Ben, who stands next to him. And that's when Luke notices that Ben's attention is entirely focused on Anakin's old lightsaber, almost as if he's being hypnotized by it. Luke then says to him, Ben, are you okay? Ben responds, still staring intently at the saber, I hear it. It's calling to me. Luke and Ahsoka exchange a look, and it's Ahsoka who then says, Perhaps you hear the Kyber crystal within. They have a type of intelligence. But Ben shakes his head and says, with a matter-of-fact expression upon his face, No, that lightsaber, it's meant to be mine. Luke then begins to say, Ben, we just talked about the responsibility that comes with having a... But as if not hearing Luke, Ben reaches up towards the saber, and as soon as he touches it, there is a flash, and young Ben now finds himself in a strange corridor, a corridor we recognize to be on Cloud City, and off in the distance we can hear the sounds of lightsabers clashing. And as Ben cautiously moves towards those sounds, seemingly out of nowhere a young girl just appears, and she looks at him with only confusion upon her face. And that's when everything around them starts to twist and turn, as if reality itself is being warped. And both Ben and the young girl start to fall, and when Ben lands moments later, he finds himself in what appears to be a small hut late at night. And when he rolls over and looks, he sees a very familiar face, though it's older than it should be, standing over him with a green lightsaber ignited in his hand. As Ben cries out in fear and terror, everything around him morphs into an entirely different scene, and now he is in a vast, red-hued chamber, where a tall, thin, and deformed figure stands over him, and pelts him repeatedly with red lightning that springs forth from his fingertips. And as young Ben continues to cry out, the figure standing over him says, Your compassion will be your undoing, just like it was his undoing. Give in to your hate and your anger, and resist the light within you. The figure then suddenly stops shooting Ben with lightning, and eyes him keenly for a very long moment, and it almost appears as if a look of fear is forming on his misshapen face, before it is replaced by sheer rage, and he storms forward and wraps his large hand around Ben's neck, and lifts him off his feet and says, You dare attempt to close your mind to me again. I am not weak as Skywalker was. There is nothing you can hide from me. The tall, deformed figure then shuts his eyes and seems to briefly concentrate. He then smiles and says, Ah, yes, there she is again, the girl. I will once again rip her from your very mind. The deformed being then places his free hand over Ben's forehead, and immediately young Ben screams out in absolute agony. A moment later, though, those screams come to an abrupt halt, and he opens his eyes and finds himself laying in the snow, a forest of tall, dark trees all around him, and standing over him, pacing back and forth almost like a predator, with an ignited blue lightsaber in her hands, is a young brown-haired woman. The woman then raises the saber over her head like she's going to strike him down, and as she does, she cries out, You're a monster! How could you do that to your own father? But before she can bring the saber down upon him, a crack forms in the earth below him, and once again Ben falls. And in seconds, he finds himself again seated unstable, though wet and muddy ground, and all around him are vague, jaded shapes within darkness, almost like he's in some type of cave or tunnel with very limited light. And in this darkness, he and we can just make out that a cloaked and hooded figure is quickly approaching him, a figure that, as it draws closer, we can see wears some type of mask with silver accents upon it, and when it stands over him, it silently extends a hand out to him, as if offering him something. And though it says nothing, Ben begins to reach out his own hand towards it, and just when he lays a finger upon it, there is another flash. And now Ben finds himself back home, in his apartment, laying on the floor with tears streaming down his face, and standing over him, with a lightsaber in his hand, is Luke Skywalker. Ben then scrambles to his feet and backs away from Luke, and into the wall behind him. Luke, looking utterly confused, reaches out a hand to him and says, Ben, are you okay? But Ben's eyes go wide with fear, and without a word or second thought, he just runs away and towards his room as fast as he possibly can. Luke takes a couple steps like he's going to follow, but then he sees that Leia, who was in the next room, is now rushing after Ben. Ahsoka, who now stands behind Luke, says, Odd, I didn't even sense the Force was with him all that strongly. She then thinks a moment and confusion grows on her face. She looks off in the direction that Ben just ran and says, "Actually, I didn't feel the Force was with him at all." Luke replies, "His mind is completely closed to me." Ahsoka thinks for a moment and says, "Not even the greatest Jedi Masters of my time could completely seal their mind like he has. In fact, only one that I've ever encountered had that ability." Luke gives a single nod of the head and says, "Sidious." Ahsoka gives a bit of a frown and replies, "We never suspected the Chancellor might be the Sith Lord we were looking for all along. Not until the bitter end, that is. He fooled every last one of us. Or should I say, every last one of the Jedi." Luke turns quickly on Ahsoka and says, "How could the Jedi have failed so utterly? How could they let a Sith rise to power right under their nose and let themselves be destroyed in the process?" Ahsoka sighs and says, "I have no answers. None that are likely going to make any sense to you, at least." Luke fires back, "Try me, because it seems like I'm now the one who has to pick up the pieces after their failure." Ahsoka lowers her gaze a bit and says, "I'm sorry, Luke. I know it isn't fair that you have become the last hope for the Jedi because they failed, because we failed." Luke then takes a deep, calming breath and says, "Help me then. You know the ways of the Jedi far better than I do." Luke turns his head to look towards where Ben ran off and says, "Because I'm afraid I don't know how to train him, that I'll fail him, and if he's as powerful as I think he is." Luke shakes his head and falls silent, and Ahsoka simply says, "I am no Jedi." But Luke quickly says back, "But you were, and something tells me you've come here to ask for my help, and if that's the case, then let me ask you for your help as well. Help me train him. Help me teach Ben the ways of the Force, as my father once taught you." Ahsoka shuts her eyes tight and then says, "Ezra Bridger, you've heard of him, I trust?" Luke nods. "I have. Leia told me about him and his master Kanan Jarrus, that they helped the rebellion in the early days, before Kanan was killed and Ezra went missing." Ahsoka then says, "Ezra is still out there, and I promised him that I'd come and find him." Ahsoka falls silent and Luke says, "And you think I can help you find him?" "I do," Ahsoka says back. Luke thinks quietly for a moment and says, "Very well. I'll help you find him, and along the way, you'll help me train Ben." Luke again looks off in the direction Ben ran in and says, "Assuming he wants to be trained, that is." Ahsoka replies, "You've given him a choice." Luke again turns his head and looks at her and says, "Everyone I train, all future Jedi, will have a choice." We then switch scenes and find Mara Jade knee-deep in murky water, holding her crimson-red lightsaber for light in an otherwise dark cavern. Directly above her, a good 15 feet or so, is the hole she just crawled through, and from it, Thrawn calls down to her, "What is it you see?" Mara frowns, and as she looks up towards the hole, she says, "It's not about what I see, it's about what I feel. The dark side is strong here. It's oppressive, even." A voice then comes from directly in front of her, and it says, "If the dark side feels oppressive to you, then you are clearly not meant to be here." Mara then jumps back, raises her saber in a defensive manner, and looks at the dark cloaked and hooded figure standing before her, and we can just make out by the red glow of her lightsaber that he wears some type of dark mask with silver accents. Mara asks him, Who are you? What is this place?" The figure responds, "My name is Ren, and you are clearly not the one I seek, but you will bring him to me." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time, and this is again where I'd like to thank the names you see on your screen who help mostly with the art to bring these stories to you. And this is now where I invite you all to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.